Hi, everyone. My name is Haley,
And this is Laura.
and welcome to the Body Pod. Welcome, Brandon, to the Body Pod.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this one.
We are super stoked to get into your. Let's see. It looks like you've coached over 1,100 clients in your time since you've been an online physique coach.
Absolutely. So I've been coaching online exclusively since 2013, but I initially started in-person coaching in 2010. So it's been a long career and a lot of people, but it's been an immensely gratifying process to say the least.
So I'm just curious. This isn't even a question I was going to ask you, but how many do you train more women than men, or do you feel like it's a pretty 50-50 split?
So that's a very interesting question, especially asked me in 2025, because this has been sort of an evolution. When I first started in-person coaching, it was obviously a mix of whoever would come in the gym. And then in 2013, when I transitioned out, I was personally doing a lot of fitness modeling based out of New York City. And people were getting attracted to me that were very similar to myself. So I worked with predominantly men. So if I'm to go back to like, say, 2013 to 2015, I would say 75% of my clients were males and 25% were females. Now, what ended up happening was I was in a precarious position in 2015 where I was doing contest preps and I had my partner at the time. She decided to do a prep diet with a contest prep coach that was someone that was not related to me at all, but he was someone that was very well known within the female physique space. And she ended up suffering from hypothalamic amenorrhea. Now, no one was talking about that at the time. She was in a state of low energy availability. And I had this person in my life that had lost her cycle, had downregulated biofeedback, and there was no answers. The coach pretty much just said, hey, listen, this is what happens, and this is a cost of doing business, essentially. Now, there was two issues with that. First and foremost, she lost her cycle not even getting into stage shape. It was just a fat loss phase in and of itself. We were trying to go away for a summer vacation, and I was in stage shape. However, she was just getting lean, and she had lost her cycle, and it continued on for 6 months, and he had no interest in really intervening. And so I had to dig into my female physiology textbooks and really learn the female body inside and out beyond just like the training and the X's and O's and nutrition in terms of macros and calories and sets and reps. I had to look at the differences in female versus male physiology. I had to look at hypothalamic signaling. I had to look at relative energy deficiency, which had just gotten coined the year before by the IOC. And so it kind of put me in a trajectory where I had a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion for women. And it's actually transitioned to the point where about 70% of my clients now are women and 30% are males. If I go 10 years ago, it was exactly the opposite. So I've had very good fortune of being able to have a wide breadth of expertise and experience working with people of all different backgrounds. I mean, I've worked with everyone from IFBB pros that have been on the Olympia level stage to high level executives. Right now, I have people that are working in Silicon Valley, at Google, things of that sort. And these are high level executives. And a lot of them are females and they're badasses to say the least. So I love working with people that are just interested in bettering themselves. You don't have to be a high achiever, high performer in physique. You could be a high performer in terms of running a business or in terms of, your family life or whatever it may be. But I just like people that want to get better and that are focused on progression over time.
That's great because I feel like the physique space, I mean, that's probably that this is my own assumption and this might not even be true, but given your numbers and the transition to this larger female audience, it seems to me that with this influx of women in the weights room and the physique world, I mean, it's not anything that I followed. I was like in the Ironman world, and so very, very different. But it seems like it's getting more that more and more women over the last decade, and it just might be my age and noticing that more, that are getting more into these physique online coaching and nutrition coaches and all of that.
Absolutely. I think there has been an uptick in terms of the interest of women building their bodies. And I think that's a beautiful thing. If I'm to go back 15 years ago, when I first started in a gym, it was very infrequently that I would see women really training in a progressive manner. And when they were the minority. And that's a really unfortunate thing. So I remember encouraging women that were in my circle or that were, peers of mine to get into the weight room. And now I think that we've evolved so much in 2025 where women want to get strong. Women want to build muscle. They want to burn fat. They want to enhance their physique. And I find that to be a beautiful process. I say this often to my clients because I work predominantly with females. There's nothing more beautiful than watching a woman step into her strength, to really realize that she doesn't need to get smaller or skinnier or need to take up less space. There's these preconceived notions and these pop, ideals that were put out 10, 15, 20 years ago that some women are still stuck in. But now we're in a much more conducive environment where women feel encouraged by those, in most environments, I'm talking about in general, but they're able to explore different physique avenues rather than just weight loss in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we're looking at how your evidence, so you said you have an evidence-based approach, and if we're looking at how that has evolved over your coaching career, what have you seen the big shifts or the big changes? Like you mentioned that you know, Eric Helms, Alan Aragon, some of these big giants in the field. How have you seen for women specifically the evidence, or even just real life coaching experience that you've had with 1,000 women or 1,000 people, over 1,000 people? What does that look like now from maybe when you started in the field?
Absolutely. So I'll take this from my perspective and like how I've evolved, and then I'll go on to how I feel the field has evolved because sometimes they're not directly correlated,
Mhm.
but there are some overlapping avenues. So for me, I've evolved from having a very X's and O's focused coaching style to a more integrative approach, which I refer personally to my coaching approach as a health-centric coaching model. And early in my career, I focused heavily on macros and numbers, while that's still foundational, I lead now with physiology and biofeedback. So over the years, I've shifted more towards a nuanced and integrative approach that includes metabolic health, hormonal status, nutrient sufficiency, training quality, and psychological readiness. And especially for women, say in their 40s or in midlife, I pay close attention to biofeedback signs like their performance, their energy, their recovery, their sleep quality, even their stress tolerance. That's a huge one. And those are going to tell me more than any other scale could ever. So it's I will value those biofeedback parameters and the trends that I see and the triangulation of those trends more than I ever will their scale weight. Also, at this point, I lean much more into periodization than ever before because I'm more focused on what a client can achieve over the next 12 months rather than over the next 12 weeks. Whereas, to be honest with you, if you were to look at the online coaching space when I first got into this in 2013, no one had continuous coaching programs. These were 8 to
Yeah.
12 week programs, and people would get on and get off and get on to the next coach. There was no continuation and progression from phase to phase. And I've built out a phasic model where I take clients through multiple phases to be able to, each phase is going to potentiate one another, but also to ensure that they not only make progress within a phase, whether that be a fat loss phase or a body recomp phase or a building phase, but that they're making progress that's sustainable over the long term. They're learning habits and behaviors that can be implemented and maintained over the long haul. Now, from an evidentiary perspective, I think that we have to realize that evidence-based practice is a three-pronged model. So that includes the best available evidence from the scientific literature, that includes the experiences and the expertise of the clinician, or in my case, me as a coach, and then also the preferences, the abilities, and the bottlenecks or limitations of the client that we're working with. So I think that one thing that has really evolved over, say the last 5 to 10 years is really a focus on treating women as an individual and not treating them. There's a common colloquial saying like women are not small men. And I agree with that 100%. We can't just look at every single person as, just the same as someone else. So I wouldn't train, and this goes for all clients, but I'm not going to train, a 45-year-old woman that's in perimenopause the same way that I train a 25-year-old bodybuilder. Like that makes no sense because their goals are different, their lifestyle is different, and their stress and responsibilities that they have on their plate are completely opposing to one another. And I think that we always should have taken an individualized and customized approach, but I think that's becoming more and more evident as to why it's important and that it's going to make the difference because people, especially women, and I can say this from experience having worked with so many, they're dealing with higher amounts of stress than ever before. And to be completely objective with you, and when I compare, and this isn't to speak down upon men by any means, but I have a great sample of hundreds and hundreds of clients that are males versus hundreds and hundreds of clients that are females. And when I look at them and do a comparative analysis, women are dealing with far more stress than ever and than men are. And so these are things that we have to take in consideration. There's something called allostatic load, which is essentially your total stress bucket, which means that we don't have these different buckets that we allocate stress to. So say your physiological stress, you've been dieting chronically, you've been smashing yourself in the gym, doing way too much HIIT cardio, all these different inputs, they go into the same bucket as your emotional stress, whether that be from financials or relationships. And then also your psychological stress from maybe body image issues or not feeling confident in yourself. These all things, there's an amalgamation that leads to this total stress bucket, this allostatic load, which often in many women that I encounter, it's overflowing. So we need to learn how to prioritize stress reduction, stress management, and also realizing that we need to work with the body against rather than against the body. So those are some components that I've seen evolve, and we're making it so that there's a lot more information being put out that are very directed towards women, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah, that's the hardest part I have a client right now that is postmenopausal and has a baby.
Mhm.
And the baby's up, and it like you're just sleep deprived. I
Sleep's
was
getting knocked
doing in
down in
my,
both parameters.
yeah, like in my 20s, and like when I was having my children, I can't even imagine that having like the changes of, transitioning into menopause with the sleep disruptions and then having to get up for a child. And Laura has
Yeah, I'm in that
an
same boat.
8-month-old.
Wow.
So here you are, here we are in the perimenopause phase, and then she's dealing with the baby. So that all is accumulated in this stress bucket that you were talking about.
Mhm. No, absolutely. So it's all an amalgamation of things. And I think that we have to consider that. And really, when we're trying to cater the information or even the approaches that we take with a client, we're looking at a 360 all encompassing view. We're not just looking, I always say coaching goes far beyond the X's and O's of nutrition in terms of macros and calories, and training in terms of sets and reps. We need to consider that person's lifestyle, their responsibilities, their stressors, their psychological readiness in terms of, are they ready to diet? Are they ready to push their body in the gym or out of the gym? And so there's so many components that need to be considered that's something that I find to be a much greater evolution. We have a lot more female specific research that we can look at that is catered towards women in midlife or in perimenopause or in menopause, which really when it comes down to research, it's not giving us a protocol. It's not telling us what to do. Today's Thursday. It's not going to tell you what to do, how to train or how to eat on a Friday. However, it does point us in the right direction where someone like myself can interpret the data and then also see, does it apply to the women that I actually work with? Are they of a specific sample population that's similar to what I'm working with? If not, it's not applicable. So we have to take all those things into consideration and really have an all-encompassing approach that is evidence-based, but it's not just what the research says.
Okay, so I want to break down these phases because this is, and then I'll tell you the hardest one that I think. So we have the phases. You have primer, deficit deloads, and metabolic restoration. So how does that differ from a traditional fat loss approach? So first of all, is it hard for you to talk people into a priming phase? And let's go over what the priming phase means, because I get women that are like, yeah, no thanks. I want to start my fat loss journey yesterday. But walk us through those different models and how you chose those.
Absolutely. So a primer phase is generally where I start most women out at, and most clients in general, because to be quite frank with you, I do a comprehensive needs analysis when someone sends me an intake for coaching or has an inquiry about coaching. And really what that's going through is all these different parameters, their biofeedback, their dieting history, medication history. It could be, medical background, all these different things. And I specifically get a lot of women that are in a high stress state. They have a very long history of dieting. They have never given their bodies enough rest or enough nutrition and fueling themselves properly. So they're dealing with a bunch of downregulations. They're suffering from metabolic adaptation, which is often, misconstrued and misinterpreted as something called metabolic damage, which I know you guys wanted to talk about, so we can leave that for a little bit later. But they are dealing with bottlenecks within their physiology, which is making it so they have to sustain themselves on very low amounts of calories. So not only are they not eating enough, so they are not getting sufficient micronutrients because their calorie intake is so low, they're suffering ramifications for that. So we're seeing a downregulation in energy expenditure from all components of total daily energy expenditure. So we're seeing their BMR suppressed because they're under eating. We are seeing NEAT be downregulated because they're sluggish. They don't have a lot of energy to move around. They don't feel lively and they don't have great vitality. We're seeing exercise activity thermogenesis, which the calories that you burn during exercise being decreased because they don't have enough output. They don't even have enough energy in the system to really power through these workouts. And then also we're seeing the thermic effect of feeding just inherently going down just due to the fact that they're not eating a sufficient amount of calories. And so a lot of women come to me in this position where they want to go into a fat loss phase because they want the results that come with a fat loss phase, but their body is not physiologically in the right state to do so. So I use a primer phase as a way to enhance their physiology and really get themselves into a better place, both metabolically, but also from a habits and behaviors perspective. We need to focus on sufficient fueling. I'm working on different habits and behaviors with them, making sure that they're not skipping long times without eating, or they're getting sufficient protein spread across the day. We're really working on foundational habits and behaviors to be able, I always say this to clients, a healthy body is a responsive body. And what I mean by that is when you put yourself in a position to succeed, And when you really give your body what it needs, it'll do what you want. But it doesn't work in the reverse order. A lot of people try to force fat loss. And I'm a big fan of coaxing fat loss, getting the body in a state where you're eating sufficient calories, you're in a place where you're moving well, you're feeling good from a functionality perspective, you look good, you feel good, you function well, and you're able to have some room to cut from. So from there, once someone finishes a primer phase, which can take some months, if someone has been downregulated for many years, and I'm looking at a downregulated thyroidal axis where someone has hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's or something like that, we need to resolve that first before we try to push for fat loss, because your energy expenditure is going to be decreased as a result of that. So I take them through a primer phase, and then I would transition most people, depending on goal, into a fat loss phase. And that's where a deficit would be induced. But I like to do it through a little bit of a different combination than everyone. Some people go, deficit just from nutrition. I like to modify nutrition first. And then I also like to increase activity. And that's really where I get them into more of a high flux phase or a high flux state where they're eating more and they're moving more. So instead of being in a very low flux state where they're eating very little calories like they used to and being downregulated and unable to move a lot, so their energy expenditure is suppressed, I'm trying to keep their calories higher and then also having them move more so they have higher energy output. But with that higher energy intake is going to have better biofeedback, better energy levels. They're going to have more energy for the gym, but also outside the gym. So we're going to be burning calories more on a 24-hour basis than they would in any other state. From there, I would transition out to a metabolic restoration phase. A metabolic restoration phase is my way of refining a client's maintenance calories. And why that's so vital is because say that you've lost a sufficient amount of weight, say that you've lost 10% of your body weight. You went from 150 pounds to 135 pounds. Well, if we look at the research literature on this, there's a great literature review by Leibel and Rosenbaum from 2010, and it's adaptive thermogenesis in humans. And what they found was a 10% weight loss can lead to a 25% decrease in total daily energy expenditure, meaning you're burning 25% less calories than you were. So say that you were someone at 150 pounds with a 2,000 calorie total daily energy expenditure, meaning that your maintenance calories were 2,000. By the end of that fat loss phase, you could be down to 1,500. So we can't just bring you right back to 2,000, which was your previous maintenance, and expect that you're going to be able to maintain the fat loss that you've had, and you're not going to rebound. So we need to work your calories up over time, and we have to replete any nutrients that have not been sufficient during that phase. And so I'm really trying to refine someone's maintenance calories. I'm trying to reestablish and increase energy availability so there's more energy coming to the system. I'm trying to focus on improving biofeedback to recover from the diet itself. And that's a phase that's very vital, but these are just like the primer phase is overlooked, the metabolic restoration phase is overlooked as well. Most people are jumping from fat loss phase to fat loss phase. And the only time they're not in a fat loss phase is when they're falling off on the weekend. So this is what I refer to as the concept of weekday dieting. People slam themselves Monday through Friday, they slash their calories, they go hard in the gym, and then on Saturday and Sunday, they fall off. So it's pretty much getting the worst of both worlds. You're getting the down regulations and the hormonal adaptations that come with diet-induced metabolic adaptation Monday through Friday. Then you're getting the fat regain that comes with overfeeding on Saturday and Sunday. And you're really kind of you're in what I would call diet purgatory.
Okay, I have a bunch of questions. Number one, so you talked about the primer phase. So you how do you know when a client's ready to come out of a primer phase? You said it could be a couple of months, and that's where does that depend? Well, number one, on the biofeedback, I'm sure, but does it also depend on how much weight a person has to lose? And well, I'll stop there.
Yeah. So the length of primer phase is going to depend on that person's physiological and psychological readiness. So I'm going to look at multiple parameters, but both objective and subjective feedback to see if they're in a right state to move forward. Now, I really want to make this apparent though. A primer phase is not a lack of progress. A lot of people will analogize that with maintenance phase. I'm generally recomping women during that phase because I'm increasing their energy intake, but I'm doing so through very specific and strategic nutritional modifications. So a lot of times women come to me and they're under eating protein. So I'm increasing protein, which has a high thermic effect of heating. It's going to increase and lean to better ability to increase lean mass. I'm also pairing their training with that nutrition. I'm utilizing strategies such as nutrient timing, where I'm fueling around the workout perimeter. I have a lot of women that come to me and they're training in a fasted state. And now we can debate the cortisol secretion of fasted training and this, that, and the other. Like many people are going to get into the mechanisms, but really when it comes down to it, if you look at outcome data, on people in resistant training studies, fasted versus fed training, we see better outcomes in fed trainings for resistant training in particular. Aerobic training is a completely different animal, but we're seeing better outcomes. So when I'm able to take someone for 8 to 12 weeks and increase their training performance, get them progressively overloading, following a progressive resistance training program where they're actually getting sufficient mechanical tension on their bodies, they're actually training in a manner that's conducive to maximizing muscle growth. Now they're increasing their lean body mass and generally staying around the same weight. So they're recomping. But really, if you think about it, when you increase lean mass and you stay around the same weight, that means your body fat percentage, without even going through a fat loss phase, you've decreased your body fat percentage. So a lot of times, if you were to look, and I would refer anyone to look at my Instagram at Brandon DaCruz _ you could see primer phase transformations. And these people look leaner and look more muscular. And that's because they've recomped during that phase. So it isn't a period of stagnancy. It's just, we're not going to be chasing fat and weight loss on the scale because you already have adaptations that are not going to be conducive for you to actually move forward and lose a substantial amount of weight. If you come to me with a downregulated thyroid, or you have low sex hormones, or you've lost your period, with many of the women that come to me, they have gone through chronic dieting cycles where they're in hypothalamic amenorrhea. I mean, they've went 3 or more months without a consistent menstrual cycle. We need to resolve that first and take off that bottleneck from your physiology before we push forward for any more fat loss.
Yeah, that's super important. I can't believe that your partner at the time went, what, 6 months?
Yeah, so I'm going to be completely frank with you. I've had women up to, so I actually had a case study recently. I have a woman up in Canada that I've been working with. It took her 10 years to restore a menstrual cycle. And we worked together for a year and a half just to get it back online. And that was due to many things. She had an eating disorder early in life. I have a client that actually, I just put this up on my story today, coincidentally, that it was, the caption of the story was that if you had told me 15 years ago when I'm on the gym floor training meatheads, that the highlight of my week would be restoring someone's menstrual cycle and having a client, email me that, I would have never believed you. But at this point in my life, these are some of the highlights of my week. So I had a client recently that had lost her period. Has a very large social media influence and following, and she was trying to stay lean for the gram. It is what it is. And she had lost her period for 3.5 years. She just got it back yesterday. So this is a huge accomplishment for her. And then I've had another woman, and these are just, I've helped dozens of women restore their menstrual cycle, but these are specific cases that stick out in my head. I had a woman that was actually 40 when she lost her cycle. She was a competitor, and her coach had told her, hey, this is part of the process. And very similar to my partner was 10 years ago. However, when it didn't come back in a year or two, she was 42 years old. She went to her PCP, and he told her that she had went through menopause early. So she had went through menopause at 42. So
I'd be so pissed.
So mad.
If that was true.
Here's this story. So at 48, she starts working with me, and it was the first time in her life where she was sufficiently fueled. I ran blood work every 3 to 6 months. I was looking at hormonal patterns, markers, physiological, biofeedback, looking at a resting heart rate. She was in a sympathetically driven state. So when this woman came to me, she had the resting heart rate of like 81. So she was in sympathetic overdrive. So very stressed, high cortisol secretor, all these things. And she had stayed very, very lean for very long, had used androgens. There was a bunch of things in the system that were really confounding whether she had hypothalamic amenorrhea or she was menopausal. But she came to me and told me, Brandon, I'm menopausal. Okay, not going to argue with you. So 6 months in, I get a voice note, and she's hysterically crying. She had her first period. I worked with her for another 2 years. She had periods into her 50s. So that was a misdiagnosis just based on the fact that her initial coach had told her, hey, that's normal to lose your period. He had done nothing to restore it or to try to get her hypothalamic signaling back online, and hadn't educated her to the point that, hey, listen, this is something that may come from being in low energy availability, but then we got to get you out of this state, get you out of a deficit, get you out of a period of active weight loss, and focus on restoring your menstrual cycle. Because we even see in the literature, there's a great study by Holiday, and it's a case study on a female athlete who lost her cycle about 12 weeks into a contest prep phase. It took her 72 weeks to get back. And the reason for it was she was staying way too lean during her actual post-contest phase. So we have to be very specific. So the phases and the progression, the duration that I take someone through is based on that individual's specific case.
Do you only work with physique competitors?
Absolutely not. So I have a wide demographic. So I used to work with I would say predominantly with physique athletes. And in 2019, I stopped competing myself. And then since then, I no longer work with as many. I used to work with a lot of professional physique athletes, but now it's mostly lifestyle clients. Like I said, the best way to encompass who I work with are high performers. And it doesn't have to be a high performer just in the gym or in their physique or in competition. I work actually much more with lifestyle individuals that I think what I can relate to with a lot of clients that I work with now is they're type A individuals. They burn the candle at both ends. And we can relate very much so because I was the person that Haley, I was telling you this offline. I spent 10 years in a corporate structure where I was working in Manhattan while I was building my nutrition coaching business. So I was a national sales director. I flew all over the country. There was many years I was on the road 40 weeks a year trying to, enhance my physique. And I was competing at that time. I was burning the candle on every end that you could think of. At the same time, I was staying up every single night when I would get home to hotels, or I'd get back from a trip, or I would be waking up at 3 a.m., which I still do to this day, but that's for a different reason. I'd be waking up in the morning to do client check-ins because I was trying to build a coaching business for 10 years while running a massive company, as a sales director for those 10 years. So I can very much relate to the individuals that are trying to do it all and they want to do it all. And I get that, but we really have to prioritize specific goals. And that's why I use a phasic approach where each phase has a specific intention and goal. We stay focused on that and then we move on to the next. And each single phase will potentiate the results of the next one.
Why do you wake up at 3 a.m.? I just have to know.
So I was saying this to Haley off air, Laura, but I have about 30 to 40% of my clients currently are international. So I have a lot of clients in New Zealand and in Australia, and I want to be able to interact with them and communicate on a time basis where I can still get through to them. So for instance, a lot of my clients internationally are between 8 to 14 hours ahead of me. So basically the latest I could really wake up is 3 a.m. to be able to get in touch with them before they go to bed or before they have family time and things like that. And I'm someone that I really pride myself on great communication and being really like in the trenches with my clients. So I find that this is the best way for me to set myself up and set them up for success.
So when do you go to sleep?
I go to sleep at 7 p.m. So I know that's
I was
quite
going to say, you have to get the 8 hours.
So I go to
Because
bed
you do
every
not
single
look
night.
tired or sleep deprived. That's why I'm like,
No, I've been up since 3 a.m. I've been up since 3 a.m. today and I'm good to go. No, I have a very dialed in circadian rhythm. So I had some sleep issues early on because I was obviously traveling all around the country, but I've really dialed that in. That's something I very much focus on with clients. Like I said, it's not just about nutrition. It's not just about training. It's about an all-encompassing lifestyle design and really trying to optimize things. So I found that, specific sleep hygiene routines or even supplementation, things of that sort can really enhance someone's ability to get quality sleep and to get the sufficient quantity that they need. And that's going to have downstream ramifications and implications on everything. That's going to help with appetite because we know that when you have short sleep, it increases appetite. We see in certain studies up to 5 to 600 calories increase in your ad libitum, so your natural eating to satiety intake after a day of short sleep. We see that it disrupts your fat loss to lean mass retention during a fat loss phase. So there's a 2-week study by not Narudin, Nedelcheva. It's a weird last name, but they looked at the outcomes of 5.5 hours of sleep. So that was short sleep versus 8.5 hours of sleep during a deficit. And what they found was it was a flip-flop in the actual amount of lean mass and fat mass that was lost. So I believe in the short sleep condition, they lost about 55% more of their weight, same amount of weight. So it's the same deficit equated, 55% more weight from lean mass than from fat mass. And then in the other equation. So really what we see is that there could be drastic differences if you don't get enough sufficient sleep quality and sleep quantity.
All right. So what would you do with a client that wasn't sleeping well?
like me.
Take them out of a deficit, number one, I would imagine.
Yeah. So Laura, what is your case? We can go through a case study.
Yeah, you're the avatar, Laura.
I know, exactly. Well, I have a 21-month-old, and so my sleep is getting better, but let's pretend it was back 16 months old. I mean, I'm up 3 times a night.
All right, so we're going to try to optimize within what's in your control. So I'm a big advocate of, I like to develop plans and strategies for clients that meet in the middle between what's optimal for that person's goal and then what's also practical for their lifestyle. Because if I just told you, hey, put blue blockers on or a mask on and earplugs and just, knock out and not take care of your child, that would get you better sleep, but that's not going to do anything.
Right.
Like that's going to impair your actual real life. So that's where we would look at a full daily design. So we would look at setting up your circadian rhythm in a more optimized manner. So first thing we're going to do is early in the morning, make sure you get sufficient sunlight. Now, if you are someone that either you wake up very early like myself and you can't get sunlight because it's 3 a.m. in Tennessee, or you just can't get outside because you're taking care of your child, we can look at a Lux light, which is going to have, essentially it's a light therapy lamp. Do it for 30 minutes and it mimics what you would get from outdoor exposure and those essentially light hitting the photons in the back of your eyes. That's going to set up your circadian rhythm. It's also going to suppress melatonin production and increase cortisol production in the morning. Now, we want cortisol higher in the morning. There's something called the cortisol awakening response, which a lot of people, a lot of women especially, have adrenal dysregulation essentially. So a lot of times I'll see even on whether it be a Dutch test or a 24-hour cortisol analysis, where they'll have high cortisol in the evening and low cortisol in the morning. So this essentially leads to a patterning where they're tired but wired at night, but they're groggy in the morning. They feel like they could sleep in all morning, but they don't have the time or the schedule to do so. So we work on setting up your circadian rhythm in that manner. 2 to 3 hours before bed, we would stop eating. So we would make sure that you had a sufficient meal, but that you weren't having anything high in saturated fat. You were having some type of meal that would be comprised of protein, obviously to stimulate muscle protein synthesis throughout the night. High glycemic carbs are actually linked to better sleep quality and better sleep latency, which means that it would help you go to sleep quicker. And then also we would have dietary fiber in there to elongate. It's going to help with blood sugar regulation, also satiety management. But you'd want to have that at least 2 to 3 hours before bed. Then we can look at some specific supplementation. So it would matter on what you're utilizing currently. For women that are perimenopausal, one of the number one things to help with sleep quality is progesterone. So we would look at a micronized bioidentical progesterone. So that could be one modality. If you want to go the natural modality, we can look at just a natural stack of whether it be minerals or even neurotransmitters. So we can look at something like magnesium that's going to help with signaling GABA and calming you down. So something like a magnesium glycinate, which is bonded to glycine, which is a calming neurotransmitter. I really like glycine, especially for women with hot flashes and with night sweats, because it helps you decrease core body temperature. We could do the same thing by having a shower before bed. Actually, hot temperatures, conversely enough, if you have a hot shower before bed, it actually cools down your internal body temperature. So it helps with sleep. We could also look at something like an L-theanine, which helps with decreasing, rumination. It's a stress reduction agent. These aren't things that are going to put you right out, but they're going to help you get into more of a parasympathetic state of rest and digest. Then we can look at, for some people, melatonin works very well. I find that to be very conducive or beneficial, especially for people with high amounts of oxidative stress. So I see someone that has like high CRP or high inflammatory markers. I actually use melatonin because milligram per milligram, melatonin is the highest or the best potency antioxidant that we have from nature. So there's like all these different modalities that we can utilize. But here's the thing. We're going to incorporate one by one to see what works for you. I really like an isolated fashion. I like utilizing the scientific method. So it wouldn't be, hey, I'm going to throw all these things, throw everything at the wall to see what sticks. It's going to be, hey, Laura, this week we're going to incorporate this. Before bed, I want you to take 200 milligrams of magnesium glycinate an hour before going to bed. And I want you to do that for the next week and report back to me how you feel. Do you have any digestive discomfort? Do you have any, are you feeling a little bit more rested and regulated? And we'll add things to the mix, but we'll take things in an isolated and more of a strategic fashion.
I just took notes while you were talking. That is really good advice.
If you need any references or anything else, I can send it to you after this.
No, your approach is smart.
If we're back to the fat loss phase, and you talked about high flux, because I think this is super interesting, and I want to say it was Andy Galpin maybe that was talking about it, not recently, but maybe last 6 months recently. But by high flux, you're meaning you want to start someone on higher calories, but it's still in a deficit, but not a moderate deficit, and you're adding on exercise on top of that to balance the energy out.
Yeah, let me explain the concept of energy flux for you, because this is actually something that I kind of brought to the fitness industry. If you look at my name and energy flux, you're going to see dozens and dozens of podcasts. I've done presentations all around the country. I've written for Alan Aragon's research review on this. So there's a lot of comprehensive information I've done on this, and I've really tried to push this forward because when I was initially in the fitness industry, especially working in competition prep and things of that sort, I started noticing that there was a lot of hormonal and metabolic downregulations where people were having to eat very low calories and they were just like in a state where they were in this chronic state of restriction and subtraction. And I really liked the idea of getting them into more of a model of abundance and addition. And I was looking at different pieces of literature and trying out different methods with my clients to try to see how I could offset these down regulations. So the first thing I started looking at was there was great research on what comprises most of metabolic adaptation. So metabolic adaptation is diet induced. And what it means is when you go into a deficit, you see a down regulation in all 4 components of your total daily energy expenditure. And the number one most impactful area of metabolic adaptation is actually your NEAT, so your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. We see that NEAT, or down regulations in NEAT, account for 85 to 90% of the decreases in total calories burned per day during a deficit phase or during a fat loss phase. So I started looking at this and I said, well, how can I increase NEAT? NEAT is usually subconscious activity, but the one thing that's included in there is steps. So at that point, about 2015, 2016, Fitbit is becoming more popular. I'm having clients track their steps. And I started noticing that there was a massive drop-off from the beginning of a fat loss phase into like the middle of the fat loss phase. So I would have people that would be doing their normal 10,000 steps per day. And without me modifying it, they would still be doing their same cardio. Without me modifying it and specifically telling them to keep their steps up, they went from 10,000 to 7,000. I had some people at like 3,000 or 4,000. And it was a drastic reduction in their NEAT levels, essentially, or their step count. So I started looking into this model, and really 2018 was when the research on the concept of energy flux really got pushed forward by Chris Melby, who's actually a researcher out of Colorado. And so this is really what came together as a model. But when I talk about energy flux, what I'm referring to is the state of calorie turnover in the body. And this is a relationship between how much energy you're taking in through food and how much you're expending through movement, exercise, and baseline functions like your resting metabolic rate and diet-induced thermogenesis. And now, how I start people off is actually I like getting them into high flux when we're in a primer phase, because we can maintain our body weight and body composition through either a low flux state or a high flux approach. So a low flux approach is where you have low energy intake coupled with low energy output. And this is the situation that most of like average sedentary dieters or women that have been downregulated and been through chronic dieting cycles are in. They have low energy expenditure, but they also have very low calorie intake. So most women over 40 are trying to maintain their weight on a very low calorie intake. And if you ask them, and I have many conversations with women in this position, one of the things they always tell me is they feel like they're running on fumes. And so that's what we call low energy flux. And this is not sustainable. It often leads to poor recovery, increased fatigue, hormonal disruption, and a metabolism that's downregulated. So a high flux approach, how I like to simply put this is where we eat more and we move more. And what I focus on with many of my female clients is helping them maintain their body weight while improving their body composition on more calories, not fewer. And how I do that is I increase their energy output strategically through movement. I'll utilize certain changes to resistance training and daily activity like steps, all while supporting their output with proper fueling. And the reason I do this is because it's more than just eating more calories and moving more. A lot of people see it as that, but if you actually look at the mechanisms behind it, it's deeply or hugely beneficial, because you're going to increase your total daily energy expenditure in every capacity. So you're going to be burning more through increased NEAT and training. You're gonna have more energy to invest into your activities of daily living. You're, instead of sitting on the couch and slumping down, you're gonna be able to have more energy to go out and do things with your friends or your loved ones or your kids. You're gonna be fueling for better hormone and thyroid health. So that's one thing I see with a lot of women that have a chronic dieting cycle or are in these massive deficits. They usually have hormonal issues with thyroid. So usually it's low T3 and low T4. So especially from a T3 perspective, T3 is your metabolically active hormone for thyroid. And so that's going to have an implication on your resting metabolic rate and also your daily energy expenditure. It also plays roles in lipolysis, which is the breaking down of fat for energy. And so when you have low T3, you're going to be burning less calories. Your body's on conservation mode. And so by fueling yourself better, not only do you have more calories, but you also have more micronutrients. So there's a greater variety of micronutrients in the system. And so you're going to have better hormonal and thyroid health. You're also going to be building and preserving muscle, which is going to drive up your resting metabolic rate. And you're also creating more metabolic flexibility, which is that ability to switch between substrates. So you're going to be able to utilize carbohydrates during high intensity activity, like your resistance training, and then downregulate and utilize, fats during lower intensity activities, whether that's list cardio or that's just your day-to-day activities. And then the other massive thing about high energy flux, this is where the research is most impactful, is it's great for appetite management and satiety signaling. So we actually see that when people have low levels of activity, whether that is purposeful or just due to a downregulation from dieting hard, it actually dysregulates your appetite signaling. So you're actually hungrier than you would be on that same amount of intake. Now, when we get up to moderate to high levels of physical activity, we actually have better what's called energy coupling, which means we can more appropriately match our energy intake with our energy demand. So it's easier to stay at maintenance, which is something many people struggle with, especially if they had been in this low flux state. They've been chronically dieting, they've been on very low calories. Anytime they try to get out of it and they try to go back to maintenance, they overshoot it and they suffer from body fat overshooting, where they regain as much fat or more fat than they lost in the fat loss phase itself. Well, by getting into a high flux state, you're able to maintain your body weight on a higher amount of calories, and you're putting yourself in a better position to succeed. So if I have someone in a primer phase and I take them through and I get them into higher energy flux, it gives me a larger budget to play with. So I can pull more calories, or I get to pull calories and not bring them down as low as they've been in the past. Because I have many women that come to me and it's like they've been eating 1,000, 1,100 calories, 1,200 calories. And it's just not sustainable, because they're able to do that for a few days when they're white knuckling it. But once, the motivation leaves or willpower, exits, they just don't have it in them to continue doing that. And they shouldn't.
Do you have any clients on GLP-1s?
I currently do not, but I'm pretty well versed in GLP-1s. And I find it to be something that is going to be incredibly advantageous in the future. I will say that there are a lot of people in the fitness industry, especially from a coaching perspective, that are adamantly against GLP-1s. And I think that's just being negligent of the data. These are the biggest advancement in obesity management and treatment than we've ever had. And they're only going to get better from here. So I do think that I think of this as a life raft for a client. I will say that I have worked with a good amount of clients in the past that have been on GLP-1s. Now, this is not an intervention that I've implemented. This is something that they've come to me on, or come to me needing. However, I've been able to support them from a resistance training perspective, a nutrient perspective, a blood work perspective, making sure that they're not suffering from a lot of the consequences of GLP-1 use without guidance.
Okay, so for low energy availability, because this is, I just recently talked to Mickey about this, but we see this, you're right. A lot of women over 40 are coming in and they've been chronically dieting and they've, not had regular cycles because of that, but they didn't know it was low energy availability, especially the endurance crowd. Is there, if you were to take somebody into a deficit, like you've primed them and now they're in a deficit and it's modest, you're paying attention to it, because I get this question a lot after maybe even a couple of days of being in a modest deficit, and I know what is the prescribed exercise is. So this isn't large amounts of exercise on that day, on that specific day, or over let's say a 3-day period. Can you, and the question now comes up because everyone knows about it, I think I'm in low energy availability. I must be experiencing red S. Well, it's only been a couple of days. Are you doing a lot outside of this? But does that come on that fast? I know we can have influxes throughout the day, but what's your opinion, I guess?
Oh, this is super interesting. So there is a recent consensus statement by the IOC that it was an update on relative energy deficiency in sport. Now, let me be very clear about relative energy deficiency. I think that for a lifestyle population, it's more appropriate to discuss metabolic adaptation, which are the diet-induced downregulations in energy expenditure that are transient, not permanent. So we can discuss that a little bit later. I'll go through relative energy efficiency. Relative energy efficiency is a mismatching of energy intake and energy expenditure, specifically through exercise. So how low energy availability is calculated is you take someone's lean body mass and you do it per kilogram of fat-free mass, essentially. You look at the difference between their total energy intake and their total exercise energy expenditure equated over their amount of lean mass. Now, here's the issue. There are calculations you can do, but they're imprecise because most people are not going to accurately track their calories. And even if they did, okay, we have one piece of the parameter or one piece of the pie. Secondarily, if we actually look at exercise energy expenditure devices, there's a meta-analysis, I believe it's from 2020, which looked at wrist-worn devices and technology for looking at calories burned during exercise. And they were between 28 to 93% off of accuracy. So we're looking at massive discrepancies where you really can't trust your Apple Watch, your Oura Ring, none of these things, your Fitbit.
Which is a huge bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just. I have a full episode breaking down the research on this, but they're highly inaccurate. So you can use it as a guide to say, all right, well, today I burned 1,000 calories. Now that is not accurate. First of all, we would have to look at the net amount of a calorie burned from exercise, which means you have to subtract your actual resting metabolic rate and what you would have burned in that 1 hour period in and of itself, which most people don't do. They just add it on top of the amount of calories in and of itself. But secondarily, say that you have a calculation. Generally, you burn 500 calories per day, and then one day you go on a hike, you have an extra resistance training session, whatever it may be, and you burn 1,000 that day. Just know that you most likely burn more because you had a higher output or you had higher activity levels, but that doesn't mean it's accurate. So looking at low energy availability, like I was alluding to, there was a consensus statement on this, which looked at and it differentiated low energy availability in the model of REDS. And what they found was that there is short-term or there's adaptable LEA. Adaptable LEA means that this could be and this was specifically in the context of athletes. So they looked at it from like a weight cut perspective or someone that needed to meet a body weight goal to compete, or it's a short term of being in an energy deficit and also in a period or a state of low energy availability to hit a goal, but it's not chronic and problematic. Now, the opposite end of the spectrum is the problematic low energy availability. Now, problematic low energy availability is chronic, which means it occurs over months and months. And that's where we see really the implications. If you ever look at relative energy efficiency, I suggest anyone that's interested in this, you look up relative energy efficiency on Google, you'll see a spoke and it's a wheel. And you see all these different ramifications. So we see metabolic consequences, we see cardiovascular consequences. Really within that, we see low estradiol and low progesterone, but specifically from low estradiol, we see an increase in cardiovascular disease risk. And we also see high cholesterol levels because when you have low estradiol and also low thyroid, you're not clearing cholesterol as readily. So you'll see high triglycerides, high LDL, high cholesterol in total. From there, you'll also see bone health decrement. So this is where we can get into osteopenia or osteoporosis. Now, that is a chronic condition that takes much time, but oftentimes when someone has been in a state of LEA for years on end, that is where they get to. So generally, if someone's just dieting, they're just going into a moderate deficit, like what I would recommend would be a small deficit at most for women, they're not going to get themselves in a chronic state of LEA. Now, they might bounce in between periods of LEA, maybe 1 day per week or 2 days per week when they have a high amount of output or they have additional activities, but they're not going to be living there chronically. So this is not something you need to worry about unless you are someone that is incredibly active. You're an athlete, you're someone that's a competitor, you're a triathlete, you're an endurance runner, someone that has very high levels of energy output. And then you're also underfueling yourself. You could be in a state where it's likely that you'll be in LEA. But if we're talking about the general population client, the lifestyle client, a woman in her 40s to her, say 40 to 55, that's just looking to lose fat, generally they're not in LEA.
Okay. What's a deficit deload?
Okay. So that is a approach that I use. You must have been digging through my social media because you've been finding all my stuff, all my terms. All right. So a deficit deload.
We want to know. Yeah.
My version of a diet break or a refeed. But the reason I refer to it as a deficit deload, and I actually had a conversation with this years ago when Bill Campbell was first publishing his diet break study. This is actually a study that ended up being published under Madeline Seidler. But Bill Campbell is I think the head author on the study. And my philosophy was I used to utilize refeeds and diet breaks with clients. And with refeeds, people always had this connotation, essentially, that they need to overeat. And so that was a negative. And then with diet breaks, they kind of just went off the rails. So with deficit deloads, I started utilizing an approach with clients that I would take 4 to 7 days of bringing them back up to maintenance, generally through carbohydrates to refuel muscle glycogen, refuel energy stores. But I would also do it in a manner that was very strategic and controlled. So I always send clients an outline of the deficit deload in terms of food sources, in terms of the scheduling that I want them to do, in terms of what happens if you mess up and you overeat, how to get back on track. So I really try to make it that this is a physiological reprieve from the deficit. And the reason I refer to it as a deficit deload is everything I do is periodized, both in terms of training and nutrition. So many of my clients are already used to utilizing deloads as a way to decrease physiological fatigue that is accumulated over the course of a mesocycle. So when I utilize the term or the approach of a deficit deload, my clients kind of just come to and they're like, okay, so this is just a break. We're trying to dissipate diet fatigue. They don't see it as this is like this all or nothing, black or white mentality where we just veer off the beaten path and we eat whatever we want, because that would be counterproductive to the actual goals of a fat loss phase. I want to bring you back up to maintenance. I want to reverse some of the adaptations. I want to get more energy in the system, but I want to do so in a manner that's conducive for your performance, for your physiology, and then also for your psychology. I don't want you bouncing between periods of being in a massive deficit to overeating and binging.
Okay. So I like the terminology that you use around that.
I do too. It's
Appreciate
helpful.
that. Yeah, I think words matter. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like if we reverse back a little bit, when you talk about, you said that, and I agree personally, but I know there's a lot of chatter in the fitness field right now about the fasted versus fed training. Like if we're talking about, not an endurance athlete, but if we're just looking at an hour of really hard, ideally pretty taxing, whatever that looks like, resistance training session. I can't imagine myself going into and busting out a 275 pound deadlift for X amount of reps with zero food, especially because I wait. I don't eat 2 to 3 hours before bed. So what are your thoughts on that? And I know we kind of talked about it, but anything else to add in this conversation of the fasted versus fed? Is it a deal breaker either way?
Absolutely. And so I will say from a coaching perspective and a practical perspective, I don't think anything is ever a deal breaker, because that would mean that I wouldn't be able to meet my clients where they're at. And that's the number one component of coaching. First, it's do no harm. And second is meet your client where they're at and inch your way to getting into a happy compromise between the two. But I will say, especially with women, I have many women that come to me where they've been resistance training in a fasted state, and they haven't realized maybe some of the consequences or the drawbacks of that until I start having them integrate slowly but surely, integrate more nutrient timing philosophy where I'm really surrounding the peri-workout window, which means the window both pre, during, and post with some nutrients. So the first thing I'll generally include is something just like a whey protein shake. So they're going to need to get hydrated. So I'll put whey protein and I'll put a serving of salt just so they have some type of hydration. We'll start with that. That is going to give them sufficient amino acid availability, which will break the fast and get them from that catabolic state of being in the morning and fasted into more of an anabolic state because you're signaling muscle protein synthesis. So that's the first step. Secondarily, then I'll start adding small amounts. Maybe it's some fruit or it's some rice cake, something that's easily digested. Because a lot of women say, hey, I don't want to eat a lot. I don't want to feel heavy in the gym. No worries. We can do a liquid meal. We can do something very small like an apple and a protein shake, whatever it may be. We can do a Greek yogurt and a piece of fruit. It doesn't have to be like these large gluttonous meals where you feel like bogged down, but I want some fuel in the system. And I can't tell you how many times, dozens and dozens of times, that women have come back to me weeks into the process. Now, mind you, sometimes they fight it in the beginning, but we get a couple weeks into it and they say, my performance is going up. I feel better energy-wise. I have better mental clarity. I feel more recovered, especially because I'm not only doing it pre-workout, but I'm also having them sufficiently fueled post-workout with, a quality protein source, high glycemic carbs to be able to restore and restock muscle glycogen. Now, the other thing is that if we actually look on the research, and this is why I specifically start with protein, but then I go to carbohydrates second, is that if we look at a meta-analysis by King and colleagues, actually Eric Helms, who we were discussing off air, Haley, is an author on this paper. He looked at the influence of carbohydrates on resistance training outcomes in terms of muscle gain and also performance. Now, if you actually look into the entire meta-analysis, this isn't just looking at the abstract. If you go through the entire meta-analysis, we look at confounding factors or contributing factors, modifying factors, where it made pre-workout nutrition, specifically pre-workout carbohydrates, more beneficial to resistance training outcomes. The number one was after an overnight fast. So if you went 8 or more hours without food, you had a bigger benefit to your performance and your muscle gain outcome from including carbohydrates into your pre-workout meal. Now, the thing here was the carbohydrates, it didn't have to be a bolus dose. So I believe that their recommendations were at least 15 to 20 grams. So we're not talking this huge carb load before your workout. It's enough just to get your blood glucose stabilized. It's enough to get some glucose into the system. And actually, one of the other theories behind this, and we actually have studies that look at breakfast skipping versus pre-workout on resistance training outcomes. It's just the fact of having something that's somewhat satiating, because hunger is a mechanism that actually decreases your performance outcomes. There's like a central governor theory, which if you don't have nutrients in your system, you may not be able to push as hard. There's many different competing theories. There's also like mouth rinsing studies, which show that just the act of mouth rinsing carbohydrates increases performance. So if we look at the actual literature, a few things that came out in that meta-analysis. After an 8-hour overnight fast, it was more beneficial to have carbohydrates. And also, if you were doing one of the two following things, multiple muscle groups in a session. So a lot of times I have women doing upper and lower splits. So they'll be utilizing multiple muscle groups, higher volumes. The other component of that meta-analysis was if a workout was 45 minutes or over, and most people I have are training an hour in the gym. And the other thing was if you were using larger musculature. So if you were training legs, you're just doing legs, that was another modifying factor that led to pre-workout carbohydrates being more beneficial on training performance. So when I look at what I have the women that I work with doing, they're training for say 45 to 60 minutes. They are after an 8-hour overnight fast, and they're also in a position where they're going to be pushing themselves very hard in a resistance training context. These are all, specific contexts where it would be beneficial for them to have some type of nutrients pre-workout. So that's where I'll combine, some protein, easily digestible protein, and carbohydrates pre-workout, and that will lead to better outcomes over time. Now, am I saying on an acute basis when we look at just one study in isolation that is only one day looking at fed versus fasted training that there's going to be massive decrements? No, but I really have to think about the time course over a phase and over multiple phases that I'm taking a client through. The average client that I work with stays with me for over a year. So I'm trying to stack up every single 1% or every penny that I can, because that is going to be a deposit into their progress bank that compounds and adds up over time.
Okay, we're almost out of time and I'm super bummed. But if we were to talk about coming out, bringing someone out a reverse diet, how do you step load that? What would that look like? And for a middle-aged female, any different, or just for a female in general, how do you reverse diet out?
So I don't really use the terminology reverse dieting just because there's been a lot of contention as to whether that is the best approach, to be honest with you. And really what that comes down to is a lot of times with reverse dieting, people are pretty much taking and like what we call in like coaching, like 10 carbing or 5 gram fatting people, meaning that they're increasing so little that the person is actively staying in deficit and they're still in a metabolically adapted state. So what I do is I take coaching data that I've collected over the course of a phase, specifically the last 4 weeks that I work with someone, and I'm looking at, based on their rate of loss as well as their biofeedback, what is their calculated energy deficit in their active weight loss phase of those last 4 weeks? Then I'm reverse engineering that and calculating that. That should be, if I was to back calculate that and say, for instance, I'm going to give a really easy example. If they were losing a pound per week at the end of those last 4 weeks, we know that they're approximately in a 3,500 calorie deficit. That means a 500 calorie deficit per day. Now, most people will go up just 500 calories, or I could take that philosophy. Generally, I'll increase by 85 to 90%. And the reason for that is we generally see that adaptive decrease, like I was referring to, when someone loses 10% of body weight, it's generally between 15 to 25% that they're decreasing their total daily energy expenditure. So I want to make sure I don't overshoot right off the bat. And then from there, it is a process of looking at biofeedback, looking at weight trends, looking at their performance indices, also looking at what their clothes, like how their clothes fit, what their visual photos look like, that we're able to really customize it towards the individual. There's also the consideration that we have to realize that there are 2 different approaches to the post-diet phase. If I have a general lifestyle client that's lost a decent amount of weight, but she's lifestyle lean, she isn't shredded, that's going to be a different approach where I'm going to really just try to refine her new maintenance, like I had referred to previously. The maintenance after your fat loss phase is not the same as it was previously, especially say that you've lost 15 to 20 pounds. A lighter body burns less calories both at rest and through activities. So we can't go back right to where you were maintenance-wise. We will work that up over time. However, if you're someone that you're an athlete or you're a competitor, or you're just someone that has gotten into photo shoot shape and you've gotten to unsustainable levels of leanness, we need to actually increase your calories even more right off the bat, because we have to get some fat back on your system to regulate your hormones, your appetite signaling, and just your physiological status. And that is something that's very hard for people to understand. But if you are at a state where you're at very low levels of body fat, I've had women at 14, 15% body fat, which is way under, where most people are going to be. And we're talking 15 on a DEXA. So that would be what people colloquially would say would be like 10% body fat. We're talking shredded women. You cannot expect to stay there, because you're not going to be able, first of all, you're in a state where you're metabolically downregulated. You're going to have issues from a hormonal, especially if you're natural, from a hormonal perspective. You don't want to stay in that low estradiol, low progesterone state. Not only is that rough to your biofeedback, but also to your bone health, to your cognition, to your cardiovascular health. All these different things, they have downstream ramifications. And a lot of times people are only thinking about the here and now, like, hey, I look great, but we really have to think about the long term. And that's something that I really try to empower my clients through education and let them know, hey, these are the upsides, but also the downsides of doing this. You want to get in the shape of your life, you want me to get you into photo shoot shape, by all means. But this is the non-negotiable after. We have to do what's called a recovery diet, which means that your rate of gain post-diet is going to be quicker than it would be in a metabolic restoration phase or a normal post-diet phase where you had just gotten lifestyle lean.
Brandon, I'm going to go listen to every podcast episode that you did.
Same.
And catch up on all of this and whoever you've been a guest on, because I love your approach. Mm-hmm. Number one, I knew I was going to like you because Mickey's like, Haley, he's so smart and he has no ego. And I'm like, the ego's in the field. So thank you for being super kind. You explained everything so well, and you just have a nice approach and a nice take on it. So first of all, let's find out what your podcast is and where women can find you.
Absolutely. So if you guys would like an evidence-based podcast, this is just like a solo podcast. Generally, I'm just doing it by myself, but I've covered every single question that you've asked, which coincidentally, many of these things we hadn't discussed earlier that we were going to discuss, but I have an episode on everything we just discussed. So primer phases, I just put one out, health-centric coaching, all these different things. If you're interested, you could look up the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast on Spotify or iTunes. Other best place to find me would be on Instagram. I put out daily content, which is at Brandon DaCruz _. And then for my email, I'm always open to answer questions or help with people if you need individualized coaching. That is bdacruzfitness@gmail.com.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking your time and sharing with us today. I am very enlightened and thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
It was an absolute honor, and I truly appreciate you guys having me. And I know we only got through probably like 3 or 4 of the questions on the list. If you guys ever want to go through the rest, by all means, I'm always open to share my information and really connect with like-minded individuals. These always make my day.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and sharing the Body Pod with your friends.